Thanks, Senator Grassley. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. First, thank you for your leadership on this issue. Attorney General, I don't know what you're hearing. I'm sure you meet with a lot of constituents in Illinois, but I want to share with my colleagues that when Rhode Island's Realtors come in to see me to ask for what they need to support them in their professions, in the last couple of years, they've started raising this question of student debt. They're recognizing that there is so much student debt out there that is starting to depress their ability to put people who should be in houses into houses because they're so burdened with debt. So it's telling for me when you hear the realtors of the country coming in and saying, you really have to do something about this student loan debt because we're seeing people who we should be able to put into a house. They're at the right time of their lives, they've got the right level of income, they're ready for this responsibility, they just have too much student loan debt. So I appreciate everyone's attention to this issue. It also strikes me that while mortgages are available at 3 or 4% pretty readily, student loan debt often charges 8, 10, 12%. And I wonder if Ms. Gonzalez and Attorney General Rao could comment on that interest rate discrepancy and what that does to borrowers in an environment in which other people are getting loans at much more favorable rates.
I can speak a little bit to that. I can say that because of the IDR program and the interest that accumulates when basically you're paying less than or just interest on the loan, the borrowers who took out X amount of loans end up owing 3-4 times that amount because of that accrued interest. This is especially true for those borrowers that took out loans in the 90s or in the 2000s, and so now we're 20, 30 years out at a 6 to 7 or 8% interest rate. That in some cases the amount of the interest actually out is larger than the amount of the original principal.
In bankruptcy, can a debtor and the entity holding the loan agree separately to a lower interest rate in order to allow both to continue?
So yes, there are settlement options in bankruptcy, and that is usually the way these cases go rather than going to a trial.
Yeah.
But it's a hard road to hoe in terms of convincing government counsel that this is a case that should be settled out for something, whether it's a lower interest rate, whether it's a zero payment for a certain number of years, things like that.
As a general proposition, a bankruptcy is a bankruptcy, and a whole lot of different things can put an American into bankruptcy. One of the areas where I've been doing a lot of work, Attorney General, has been on medical bankruptcies, because medical bankruptcies, it's really hard to say that there's moral fault on the part of somebody who was driven into bankruptcy by having a heart attack, by getting a horrible diagnosis, by facing an issue that puts them into an impossible financial situation that is not of their own making. It's an illness that befell them. And is it the case that the student loan debt is non-dischargeable, Attorney General, whether or not that's the cause of the bankruptcy?
Well, the issue you raise about moral fault, the notion of sort of characterizing somebody who's trying to attain a higher education, knowing the differences in income between those who attain higher education as juxtaposed to those who don't.
Who would not want to do that, right? That's
Exactly.
the thing to do.
And the idea of being able to characterize one who seeks out that higher education and the loans as a result of being in moral fault for
even people do make that point. Nevertheless, I agree with you, but people do make that point, and I think medical debt is an example of a place where nobody can make that argument fairly. If somebody has a terrible, terrible diagnosis, then that changes their lives and it can wipe out their finances. And if they need to go into bankruptcy, that will be what drove them into bankruptcy. And there's a bankruptcy judge sitting there and saying, I'd really like to help you out, but there's this law about your student loan. Even though you were perfectly good about paying it back, even though you intended to, you got wiped out by something else. Even then,
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Senator. And I'd like to go back to a point that you made at the outset and that Ms. Gonzalez touched on is, as you talked about the realtors in your area, these student loan burdens prevent people from what we as Americans believe is living out the American dream, being able to purchase a home, start a family, educate your kids.
Yep.
It's a burden preventing them from doing so. As a result of the higher interest rates, many of these borrowers will have that burden for the rest of their lives.
well, my time's up, but I want to thank the chairman and I want to thank the whole panel.